Thank you for being here. Reverend Coakley is going to be late, so we're going to go ahead and start the meeting. We'll call to order the meeting, the workshop for the bylaws this afternoon. If we could, as we get started, Mr. Gray, would you lead us in the invocation, please?
Yes, sir, if you don't mind, I have prepared remarks that I got from the music minister at our church I'd like to read.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know that I was going to be called on. If you would bow with me, please. The Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. If we could do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we're here for the purpose of the workshop for the bylaws, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Emma Ruth. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to make this as interesting as we can for a set of bylaws. All right, we're ready to start with the PowerPoint. Up here, I just have kind of an overview so you'll know where we're headed. It should be hopefully pretty simple and painless. Of course, just if you have questions, let us know so we can discuss them. But I thought as a preliminary review, I just go over the change in the IRS status. It should take a couple of minutes just to refresh everybody's memory. Then the proposed amendments. And then there was also a request that we just look over the rules and maybe discuss the rules for the board. And then a short Freedom of Information Act follow-up on some questions that were raised. Okay, next. As y'all may recall, the board authorized the hiring of a law firm in Columbia. Frank Curitan was the lawyer because he had made a similar request on behalf of the city of Myrtle Beach for the Sheraton Convention Hotel for a status letter. So in August of 2013, a letter was drafted and sent to the IRS for reclassification of the authority as a Section 509c3 public charity. This would change it from what had been its 509A3 status as a service provider publicly supported organization. It did not result in any substantive changes to the authority, and the purpose of Form 8940 was filed along with certain schedules. When the authority was formed, it was recognized by the IRS as exempt from federal taxation under 509A3. The change was later made in reporting requirements to require informational returns of certain Section 509 organizations. Next. So what the authority, the board authorized was that so that the authority did not have to file these informational returns, we would request a change in status, and so by, as another item of history, it was back in 2002 that the IRS issued its determination that the authority did not have to file a Form 990. That was the informational return. Therefore, the authority did not file them. By a letter received December 21, or dated December 21, 2011, the authority was later informed that there had been a change to the IRS requirements, and the informational return would be required because there had been a change in the reporting requirements for Section 509A3 organizations. All right, next. Again, it did not mean the authority had to pay taxes or anything like that. This was just an informational return. So on August 30th, 2013, after consulting with and decision by the board to request the reclassification of status. Again, this is like a paper formality, and the request for miscellaneous determination was filed requesting the reclassification. All right. This request was was granted. Now, in the process of filling out the paperwork and making the request for reclassification, the issue of the bylaws came up. We reviewed the bylaws. They were thoroughly reviewed with the board. Next. And so what we have before us today will be nothing new, but we're going to look at the proposed bylaw amendments. Now, before we proceed to the amendments, is there any need or desire to discuss any of the provisions, and we can kind of start flipping through them? If there is, let me know, and we'll put a hold on that page. But of course, we start with the name. Next.
I'd like to ask
All right.
something, please. Those first slides that you showed,
Yes, sir.
would it be possible to have a copy of those?
We could do a copy of those, or there is the letter of Frank Curitan with all of that information in it that's available also, but I certainly have no problem with you receiving a copy of those slides, Mr. Gray. That's public information.
Some of that information that you're saying was taken by board action, I don't have recall of. So what I would like to have is a copy of those slides, and of course I have a copy of what's on tape, and I can, if you also could date the board meetings where authorization was given, that would be useful
All right,
also.
and we will need to get with Esther on that, and correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection is the board was fully briefed on the issues. Some of the briefing may have occurred as a legal briefing, but there was authorization, as I recall, to retain the law firm in Columbia to seek the reclassification of the authority. But we can go back and check that in the minutes and pull that.
And provide that information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Article 2, simple. Article 3, it's general information on the status as a nonprofit. Next. Article 4, these are the purposes for which the authority is established. Again, that's taken from Horry County Council Ordinance. We can flip through these unless anyone has a question about them. So next. Next. Tell me if we need to slow down.
But there was isn't there a change of sorts? Does the blue line, pardon me to distinguish the color, but I think I'm under, you haven't gotten to Article 7 yet.
No, sir. We are on, we are still in the article on the purposes, Article 4.
Okay,
When we
I'm
get to
sorry.
Article 7, we will stop.
Thank you.
Next. These are purposes for which the Horry County Council set up the authority. All right, next. Article 5, these are limitations of authority, and where the council has wanted certain information, required certain information, limitations on expenditures, that kind of thing. Those are set forth in this Article 5. There are no changes from what they have been, so next. And next. Membership is unchanged, Article 6. And now we're at Article 7, Board of Directors. Next. We did update, as you will see in red below, we did update the code sections. When the bylaws were first adopted, we did not have a separate nonprofit code in the South Carolina Code of Laws. Later, a code specific to nonprofits was adopted by the legislature. Pretty much, a lot of those provisions are the same. So what we did was we put in the new nonprofit code section as opposed to the corporate code for for-profit corporations.
That's that little small thing about that.
That would be, that's the Code of Laws book, Mr. Gray. It's a big blue book.
338107.
What, 31 to 807 is, That's that little small scratch in red in the bottom. That's the code section for the state code. The red part is the old for-profit code section. We replaced it with the new nonprofit. Well, it's not really new
Yeah,
anymore.
mine doesn't have red, it just has blue, but I follow what you're saying.
Right, I meant red on the screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Blue on your sheet of paper, yes, sir.
The screen shows red?
Can you go up one more?
Oh, I see down at the
Bottom
bottom,
right.
yes. Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Next, this is on election, removal, resignation, terms, and vacancies. If you look on your handout on page 5, you will see that a paragraph in red was removed. And then if we go to the next slide, there it is. You see what has been removed from the bylaws relating to removal of a board member. Because when you look at the county council ordinance authorizing the authority, what you see in blue is the method in that enabling ordinance to be followed. So we went to that enabling, originally, you know, before my time, the red letter provision was set up by, I guess, by the board then. It goes before, by county council, okay. But since then, the enabling ordinance has this procedure in it, so we went to that, where takes a 2/3 supermajority vote of the board to recommend, the board cannot remove, but can recommend removal for cause. That recommendation has to go first to the county administrator within 5 days of the meeting. Then it has to be submitted to Horry County Council and requires a majority vote of the county council after written notice to the board member involved. There's another removal process by which, upon recommendation of it says respective nominating body, that a county council member that supported the appointment of that board member may propose removal with a majority of county council vote after written notice to the board member involved. So what we did was track the language in the current enabling ordinance by the county. And then there's also the addition, just so all board members know, they're required to comply with the South Carolina State Ethics Act. There's a provision, which this is a law anyway, but it affirms the authority's commitment and that of the board members, the commitment of the board members to comply with the Ethics Act.
And last sentence, second paragraph there at the very bottom, is directed by the Ethics Act, would mean recusal from?
That's correct.
Okay.
If there's a matter that constitutes a conflict of interest, then the board member must go through the steps of recusing themselves, having it reflected in the minutes, stepping down from a voting position on the matter, or discussing. And then fulfilling all of the reporting requirements of the act also, which the authority does a good job of letting all of you know when it's time and giving you a packet and assisting as needed to get all of the required filings made.
If we could go back to the first paragraph. There are several means by which a member of the board's membership could be terminated. One of them is a 2/3 majority of the board may take certain action. 2/3 of 7 is 4.669.
That
Right.
would be, you bump it up to 5.
So that means that really it would take 5 people to kick somebody out.
Yes,
so
sir.
to
It's
speak.
extraordinary action, so it takes what they call,
It takes 5 to recommend
Recommend.
the county council.
right, they can't, the board cannot kick anybody out.
Right.
But to make the recommendation of removal, because it's an extraordinary action, it takes a supermajority vote.
Yes. And does that, it would seem to me that at that time, those 5 members should be required or would give the offending party, the party to be recommended removal, would be given notice, and that it be done for cause, and that the cause be stated.
Well, the notice provision, the reasons, will, goes,
For cause.
it says removal, right, the first sentence it says may be recommended for removal for cause. Then further down, it says that the written notice goes,
To the county
to you
administrator.
before county council takes it up, because they are the deciding body. So you would
I get it,
have-
but excuse me for interrupting, but one step at a time. They're not doing it for willy-nilly reasons. They're doing it for, I believe you used the word extraordinary.
Right.
They're extraordinary.
Well, I'm saying the decision is not
Extraordinary
your,
measure.
is going to that decision-making process is an extraordinary relief.
Well, I'll
That-
use that word.
Right, it doesn't mean that it's very unusual to have circumstances that would lead to removal for cause.
Right.
However, the characterization of cause can be a separate matter. It could be, someone is arrested for an offense of moral turpitude, or there could be a numerous, absenteeism, disability, and not able to return because of
Well,
disability.
it would be my recommendation, my desire, my feeling that at that time, the 5 who are taking this extraordinary step would state, well, the reason that we are asking county council to remove this person is thus and so. Now,
You would have to state that in the letter, would you not?
It has to, in the recommendation to county council, it would be stated. Now,
Right.
if the board, if when this comes to a vote, if someone wants to propose that there be an amendment to provide that the statement of cause be provided before it goes to the board of directors for the authority, that is an amendment within the discretion of the board.
well, that's the purpose of this, that we're supposed to, as I understand it, based on the timeline that Mr. Knight has provided, we're supposed to provide a working document, I probably won't use the right term, for county council to vote on. And I'm suggesting that we decide right now whether or not the person that is being recommended by this board for removal, that it be stated as to why he's being recommended or she is being recommended for removal. Right now, it just says for cause. Well, that could mean anything. That might be because the parts is there on the wrong side.
Well, the way it's currently written, the board member would receive that statement as it goes.
From the administrator before it went to county council.
When it goes to county council.
Well, I know
So,
what it states.
And as I understand your request, Mr. Gray, you think that when it goes to the board, there should be a statement of reasons at that time.
I'm saying that when we meet as a group,
Right.
it should be known, well, the reason that the 5 of us are doing what we're doing is because, and just state what it is.
Well, one of the board, there's several ways to look at it, but one would be that the board has not met to decide whether there is a sufficient statement of reasons. It would only be after that board meeting that that type of determination would have been made, because they can't make the determination without a board meeting.
Well, they would have to have a, what do we call that meeting? If it has to be 5 of them, they'd have to have a quorum. They would have had to come to that decision. They would have had to have had a quorum meeting
Well,
and discussed, well, we should ask this person, ask county council to remove this person because they did thus and so.
Right, he wants it pre-authority board meeting. As I understand, you're talking about a notice pre-authority board meeting. Before the authority board members discuss it, you're stating there should be a notice.
No, I'm just saying that, that when this determination is made
By county council or by the board?
by the board,
Right.
that when this determination is made, that those 5 members state that we want to ask county council to remove this person, and the reason is thus and so.
That would go in the notice to the administrator.
I'm like Mr. Jones, I can read, and I
I-
understand that you can wait 5 days and you can read about it in the paper or wherever the administrator decides to put it. But I'm just suggesting that we as a group should just say, well, we don't think you should be here, and we're going to take action to terminate your presence.
Okay.
Well,
but
that
the
would
group
have-
can't determine that action until they meet as a group. So somebody has to make a motion to put it on the agenda or request that it be put on the agenda. But there can be no determination of what the cause is until the board
Actually meets.
actually meets.
Well, we should say that.
That's
We
what
don't
it
say
says.
I'm sorry?
That's what it says.
Well,
That's not
that's,
what it says at all.
well, it takes a 2/3 majority of the board. So there has to be a board meeting where it's discussed and the decision is made and it's voted, it's voted on.
That,
You can't get 2/3 majority of the board unless you're in a board meeting.
that would be my question. If that was the case and you went through that process, obviously 5 board members, it would not be appropriate for them to meet as a quorum to discuss anything.
Exactly.
So that couldn't be done, and therefore the procedure, if someone thought a board member should be removed for cause, I would assume that the procedure would be to have the chairman put it on the agenda, and that person that brought it up would bring up the board member they wanted to be removed, and would at that point give a reason for discussion. Now, whether that would be done in executive session or in open board, I don't really know what the procedure for that would be, but I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be the procedure that would go through.
That is correct, and depending on circumstances, there are situations where these kinds of recommendations have been treated as personnel or confidential types of information where they could be discussed in executive session.
Okay. But the person you would be talking about as a board member would also be
Yes.
included.
Also be included.
Okay, because frankly, if I felt strongly enough to ask that a board member be removed, I would give you a reason why, and I think that board member deserves a reason why. So wherever you want to put that in there so that it comes through that way. Now, if council decides to remove someone from his or her successor, and I've seen that done, they didn't give them a reason why, and I guess we wouldn't have anything to do with council's procedure.
That's right, they would determine how they would handle their determination. Right, this came from their ordinance.
I remember when it was changed.
Yes,
And
there you
why.
go. So what we've done is incorporate really what is the governing document for the authority in terms of, you can call it enabling legislation or authorization legislation, but this is the way it is provided in the county ordinance.
Theoretically, a board member may not be here and a majority still be reached if, in terms of a disability that you mentioned or
Right.
excessive absences. But barring those unusual circumstances, it would be in the course of a regular board meeting where that board member would be involved and included and in attendance, where it
That's-
would be discussed at
That's
that.
right. And if it
But it's
were-
not necessary that the individual be there.
It is not.
that not correct?
That is right. And
Right.
I'll give an example. Someone was in, had been in critical medical condition for a while, and there was no chance they would be returning to a board meeting. You could take that up to get a replacement to continue to move forward. If you had to have an emergency meeting because it was something, let's say somebody's, I don't know, indicted, or, there's something that just really bad that's happened and unfortunate, but, and it does,
In jail.
Does happen.
it happens a lot sometimes. But,
Can I resign from jail if I'm actually incarcerated where I can save y'all all this trouble?
a lot of the people have been indicted in our county. I can do that. If something like that happens, you might call an emergency meeting, but you have to, or let's say a special meeting. But you'd give everybody notice, so everybody could come.
But I think to Mr. Gray's question, under normal circumstances, if this took place, then the board member would be in attendance
Would
at
be
the
in
meeting where the person made the recommendation and the reason would be given,
Yes.
that obviously that would cause.
And usually, usually these things do not come as a surprise. Usually someone knows or should know. And it depends on the circumstances. There are circumstances where it may be a situation where, common courtesy, not any requirement, but might require someone to go sit down with the board member and say, I have a problem with this, and how can we resolve it, or it could lead to further problems. If something's, could become a big, like someone doesn't recuse themselves, or have said they're not going to when a possible conflict of interest comes up, or anyway, there are different ways to handle it. This is more the legal format. There are also humane ways to handle these things too that certainly should be a part of the decision.
But this didn't blazon new trails. This came
No.
out of the county.
This came out of
or-
the county set of documents.
Okay.
And it's not targeted toward anybody or any situation. It's just, it was time to, especially in light of the IRS filing, it was time to update and revise, and this makes it consistent with the county document.
And I think when it came up, the verbiage up there in the red concerned folks about the board being able to remove someone that
Yes.
council had appointed.
This is much more lenient.
So that's what this one
Yes.
is about.
The old language was certainly more powerful, and had less restraints on it than this new language.
Well, I certainly agree with Ms. Creech. And you said the guy doesn't even have to be here, and we can still vote him off.
He could be in the hospital.
Yeah, he could be sick or whatever. Or she, it doesn't have to be a he, it could be a she, pardon me.
I'm gonna separate you two.
Or it could be you.
It could be me, exactly.
And you could be perfectly fine and not indicted and not in jail and not sick. And we just decided that we didn't like you.
You
Well-
can't do it because of that. That's not for cause. Just because I don't like you is not cause to vote you off a board.
Plus, that, we don't vote him off the board. We vote to send it to county
Right.
council.
We don't
And I
vote to
think-
recommend you off just
First of
because
all,
we
I
don't
don't
like
think
you.
the integrity of the board would allow that to happen because we don't like someone. Second, I don't think county council would tolerate a request
Exactly.
saying get rid of him.
And I agree with that. I think it would be a very unusual situation. And then when it goes to council, you're going to have the council member who nominated the person right there, who normally receives a good bit of deference in their appointments. So it'd have to be something pretty severe. The cause standard would have to be met. And that, that's set forth in the very beginning of the section. This certainly has a lot more protections in it than the prior provision.
And there would always be a called meeting. There would never be, there's no secret meetings, there's no, nothing could happen.
I'm going to talk about the secret meetings in a little bit, just give you
Right.
an overview, some things that happened where there were pre-meeting meetings or telephone meetings and some interesting AG opinions on them. But
Right.
we'll talk about that so that everyone
Well,
understands.
can we just talk about this without getting into, well, this came from county council, or county council would or wouldn't do this, or somebody might be too sick to be here? Can we just say that, that if 5 people on this board decided to, recommend to council that somebody's membership be terminated, that it be done, here's a piece of paper, here's our names, and here's the reason that we feel the way that we do. Why can't we do that? And it be written in here.
All right, the
I'd
vote will
rather-
have to be made in public session.
I'd rather be done at the board meeting. You talking about, walking up and handing you a letter saying, or me a letter saying, hey, Campbell, we've decided that, but do it at a board meeting is where it needs
That's
to be done.
exactly right. We'd have to have a motion, a vote, and a vote in public.
That's not in here.
It's not. For any board action to be effective, it has to be in open session.
The board does not have the authority to make a recommendation unless it's a vote taken in the board.
That's right. A
So
recommendation is a
it
decision.
requires a board meeting to come up with a recommendation.
Right. It would have to be public.
And any board member would be present at that
Exactly.
meeting unless there were unusual circumstances about being in the hospital or incarcerated or whatever. So we would,
You know an awful lot about being indicted and being incarcerated, to be flipping those words out. Yes, sir. And I'll try to keep that in mind. In fact, you ought to keep, well, I think
let's just
that's-
focus on the bylaws. There's not any cause for this personal
Thank you.
stuff.
All I would ask is that these things that my colleagues say, well, in the normal course of events, good people meeting as we do would do these things that you're concerned about, so there's no need to write any protective language that we would do anyway. You're just saying it's going to be a long meeting and we might end up, and let's just move on and forget about what I got to say. In other words, I don't think there's really any interest in anybody. Let me just say, I think that in the basic American tenet that everybody who is accused has a right to face his accuser. I think that those that accuse people should stand before them, and I think they should sign the paper and state what they're going to do. I don't think the man should have to wait 5 days or whatever it is. Having said that, I recognize that the normal cartel against anything I say is present. And I will just register the language. I strongly object to the language. I don't think it's protective. And let those that need to go somewhere else, let them get on and get gone.
Mr. Gray, I think it addresses exactly what you're asking about. I think the language is such that it does protect all of us as board members and gives us the right to face our accusers. We would all be at the board meeting in an open session, and the calls would be given. I think it's all there exactly what you're asking for.
I disagree.
Okay, well, you know, and the 5 days doesn't have to do with the person getting notified. That's the county administrator getting notified after our board meeting in which the offending board member would be
As it is right
present.
now, it could happen, and it would be at least 5 days before the man even found out that it happened, but,
Oh, that's not true.
okay.
If you look at it calls for a vote And there can be no, I mean, the law is absolutely clear. There shall be no vote in executive session. All votes have to be public. So that vote has to be out here on the record and in the minutes of,
Well, I've said my piece. I will not take any more of the board's time. All this is recorded. Please move on. I do have, let me see if I have any other notes on this particular. We did agree it would take 5 people to do this. I believe all of you said you would only do it in open session at a regular board meeting, call a board meeting and be a quorum. And moving on to another sentence here, a member of the board may also be removed for any reason upon recommendation of respective nominating body. What does that mean?
If the council member that nominated me or recommended me for the board decided to remove me, then that county council member could do that without this board having to approve or vote on that.
That's called for in the next sentence.
as I recall, there are appointments by the league,
Recommendation. by the league.
recommendation of the league.
Mhm.
Right, so that could be that goes to non-council sponsored appointments.
What is meant there is that the League of Cities recommended person
That's right, yes, sir.
could ask that for any reason,
Cause,
it says for any reason, removed for any reason, upon recommendation of respected nominating body. In other words, what you mean there is if the League of Cities met and decided that so-and-so should be, and they recommended a person, that they wish to change their mind, that person would
that
be.
does not have cause written into it. They would have to have a reason. Again, that's the way it's worded in the council document.
County council document.
Yes.
Well, let me just say, the League of Cities is something that it has no, we act as if they were a chartered organization. They are not. They just, it says that mayors meet from time to time. I won't criticize the League of Cities, but I'm just saying that's just a bunch of people who meet from time to time, and sometimes there's a lot of people, and sometimes there's very few people, and sometimes one or two people control what happens, and sometimes there's votes and so forth. But you're just saying that another way that a member of the board may be removed. In other words, this would not go to county council, even though they were appointed by county council.
No, it does.
That would go to county council.
It does say. It says the board may remove from any recommendation from its nominating body, county council member or its successor, and a majority of county council after the written notice has been given. The League of Cities would have to recommend it, or the county council member who recommended you to council. It would then go to council, and then council would be the one who would do the dismissing.
not
That's what it says in that sentence.
No.
Yes, it does. It says, a member of the board also may remove
It says
for
a
any,
period, a
let me
period,
finish.
a period,
Reason,
then
let
you
me
start
finish.
A different thought. Let me finish.
Let me finish. I have the floor. I have the floor. A member of the board also may remove for any reason upon recommendation of the respective nominating body, comma, means and, county council member or his successor, and a majority of county council after written notice to the member concerned. And county council means county council has to vote on it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, next. we took out an extra "the." Let's see. Next. All right, next page.
One more.
One more, that's right. All right, there's an extra "the." We took that out. All right, then underneath it, in the blue, you will see a deleted paragraph. This would not, I don't think, stand scrutiny of, under FOIA. This is a way corporations have available to them to take action by consent of members without the members gathering. And we have taken that out.
I'm just trying to keep up with what I marked, I read, like Mr. Jones, like I read beforehand. Is that different than what was sent out?
This is at the top of the page,
Page 7.
Page 7.
page 7.
Top of page 7.
Thank you.
And that paragraph's just removed. There's
That is
not, that's, it's just
totally removed.
deleted. We're
It's
not
deleted.
replacing that with anything, or
That's right, because under the current,
that could get us in trouble.
that's right.
Thank you.
That would be a FOIA violation. Any questions about that? All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, I don't believe there are any changes there. The next slide, and we're still on page 7. All right, if we look at section 7, this provision, under the sort of common law on corporate boards, there is sort of a rule that someone continues to serve until the successor is elected and qualified for the position. And that had been incorporated into the original bylaws, I believe. This states that any member, there could be an issue, but when everyone receives their appointment, it is for a set term. So what this does is stay consistent with the set term. Any member of the Board of Directors whose term of office has expired shall not continue in office pursuant to Horry County Code Section 2-75A1A. So that was to bring it in, what had been kind of what was the practice under the corporate code for private corporations, brought it into the Horry County Code section. So it's to make it consistent with the Horry County Council's code.
That's right, because on the zoning board of appeals, if they didn't get someone enough, that seat just sat vacant.
See, so
that's
it's
just
not
the way-
like this group's been singled out, it's what they've,
That's the way the
council
county is.
The
applies.
previous person did not continue as,
That seat sat vacant until it was placed.
When your term is up, it's up.
And see, it is more, it's a political appointment
Yeah.
approval process, so it makes sense to have it applied differently.
And sometimes they didn't. There were several boards that didn't have a quorum until a month or so went by that they did, but they still did not continue after their term.
At one time, we only had 5 board members here for that same reason.
All right, so this really is to bring it into compliance with the county code. Section 8, all right, this relates to conduct of board members in terms of authorizing action, provides that the board member may independently direct the conduct or require the assistance of any authority staff, but shall at times direct request for information, assistance, advice, or discussion through the executive director. I think that should be at all times direct. Is that right? Again, Danny, you might want to speak up here, but this is consistent with the way things are done at the county level or supposed to be done at the
Where
county.
it's written,
That's the way it's written at the county level.
may not always work that way, but that's the way it should work.
Okay, at all times direct requests for information, assistance, advice, or discussion through the executive director. Then sometimes there's an issue on personnel files, confidential information, so that has also been covered. I know there have been days where anyone thought, or a lot of people thought they could walk in and just look at personal information contained in these files because of a position they held. And that is not a recommended procedure, especially these days. There's so many privacy considerations and protections. So this just sort of codifies for the board and the bylaws that you have to go through proper channels for request of information to be approved. Are there any questions or discussion about this provision?
I, of course, don't think we should be looking at any of the personnel's private matters.
I recommend that you do not, unless there is a matter that the director brings to your attention under one of the, for business reasons, under one of the, you know, to go into executive session exemptions for confidential information.
Or it's his file.
Or his file.
Okay, the only thing that bothers me a bit, if you are asking for general information, and I think there should be a procedure, and I realize county councils is through the chair, through the administrator, and he handles the personnel and gets back with you. I don't think, and maybe I didn't read that in county council as well, but at what point would you have ask information that would have to be approved by the board? Because actually, other than personal information, everything here is open to the public. So what would you really have to ask that the board would approve for you to have as a board member?
Okay. I think this is directed more toward a process than prohibiting information. Anybody here can make a FOIA request like anybody else. However, you know, you see it in county government at times and in all sorts of governmental bodies where if board members start independently calling departments saying, I need A, B, C, and D, the department heads or employees get nervous because here they've got someone outside of their boss, you know, with a lot of power and authority calling, and they may put that ahead of a big work assignment or deadline for a grant completion or something like that. So they've got a little bit of a conflict there that someone outside the chain of command has contacted them for information. Secondly, if they get a lot of these requests, it becomes a little bit counterproductive to the agency to not funnel that through a chain of command. I've also had situations with, like a long time ago where perhaps attorneys would try to get information from, you know, people employed by government because maybe they, you know, they knew the person, you know, you'd even go to court and things would show up that you never knew the other side had because they'd gotten someone they knew to get it for them. And again, that didn't come through a board, we didn't think, but you have to have some safeguards because board members independently, unless authorized by the board, do not have authority. They don't wear that hat of board authority unless that's conferred on them for a certain purpose by board action. Employees don't know that, and it just does not create a smooth operation.
I agree that it should go through that chain of command. I can't imagine a board member having to FOIA any information unless they were asking for something they didn't have any business with in the first place. Because anything that I've ever asked Reverend Coakley for, or Mr. Thompson as vice chair, or Mr. Knight, it's been forthcoming very quickly. So
Right, this is only how to direct the request.
Right,
So
okay.
that there is, like, just a smoothness in the operation of the organization. Any other questions or comments or thoughts about any better way to say it? All right, section 9, no board members shall,
It read funny to me.
I think
I'm
it
not
should
a,
be, I think it should be proposed to speak,
yeah,
maybe, proposed to speak.
I'm not an English major, but that one read funny to me, and I didn't know
No,
that.
it shall propose to speak or act for on behalf of the authority unless action has been approved by affirmative vote of the board. Again, when you get involved with the press, if you're speaking on behalf of the authority, let's say you're in litigation, you might commit it to a course of conduct or making it something that might later be construed as an admission of liability. And it's just sort of a courtesy to the other board members that if anybody's going to get out there and say the board is doing this and the majority of the board doesn't agree with that, then they have to explain themselves or they start getting a lot of calls. It's just a matter of doing business. Any other comments, Danny? Anything you want to say on that? Or Reverend Coakley?
No, I mean, I think it's very clear. I mean, Danny speaks on behalf of the agency, and the chair or vice chair speak on behalf of the board.
All right, next slide. Officers, we have not changed anything on page 8, so let's continue on. All right, next slide. Okay, next slide. All right, beginning with section 2A, we do have a delineation of duties for the chair. Does anybody have any questions, discussion,
I do.
concern? All right, Mr. Gray.
Two, where it says, and the chairman shall enforce the amended and restated rules of the board. I think that we're asking for a whole heap of trouble if we do not include the rules of the board into what we're asking Horry County Council to approve. So it would be my suggestion that we take our rules of the board and that we either incorporate them into the bylaws so that we got one set of operating procedures, or that we put them as an addenda to the what we submit to county council. Because like Mr. Jones, I have read both of them. And sometimes I think you will agree that they conflict with one another. Or they were written at different times for different reasons. I don't expect there's going to be any change at all whatsoever on account of what I'm proposing. But I would like it on the record that I made a recommendation that we strike him for the time being. I mean, we can always add it back later. But really my recommendation is that we include, what the chairman is to do is to preside over our bylaws, including what we call the rules of the board. And that we include the rules of the board in what we submit to county council is what I'm saying.
Yeah, do you have a problem with submitting rules for informational purposes as opposed to incorporating them into the bylaws? I mean, the bylaws do take a lengthy procedure to amend. You have to go through some steps. You may have occasion to amend the rules more often from time to time, but they could be provided to council as a courtesy each time they're amended, and they could be included with the bylaws for reference when the bylaws are sent to the council.
Well, I can't answer your question. I don't know what county council is going to do. None of us do. But I think that some might be surprised to know that we got two sets of rules, one we call bylaws and one we call rules. And that,
As I recall, the council also has a set of operating rules, or used to, for their meetings that, regulate such items as how to get on the public speaking agenda, at one time, how long you could speak, how many days ahead you had to sign up. And items like that, I don't know if those are still in effect or not, but I remember.
We do,
it's several.
or they do, they have about 3 pages that
Right.
basically says, Robert's Rules of Order, and talks about how people can come up and talk and so forth and so on. And our rules include that, but our rules include other things as well that really relate to governance of the board, as opposed to how, in fact, we have, if I understood it, Chairman, we're going to meet later and talk about revising or at least studying the amended and restated rules
Correct.
that were done October of 2011. Mr. Jones was chairman. He signed them. Everybody signed but Bob Bellamy. He wasn't here. He was vacant. But anyway, that's my suggestion, and for that reason and the other reasons I stated alone, I can't approve this. I'll be a dissenting vote unless we include those rules.
Now, I have a question about number 4 on the committee assignments and subject to approval by the board. I think that came up the other night about whether, when the chairman was making the committee assignments, whether that did require approval. And
It does not.
I know in the past it has not.
It does not.
Now, this
That's
says.
that's the chairman's call to appoint the committees. It's not by anybody's approval.
The bylaws say the
This
approval of the
change,
board.
though, that would make.
yeah, that was my understanding as well. That's why I highlighted it here, that it was a change from what,
The bylaws say that the subject to approval of the board.
correct.
The rules just say that the chairman does it. And there are other areas of conflict as well.
I would hope that we would leave it where it's the chairman's prerogative to appoint the committees. In other words, we're gonna, you've got the, well, I won't go there, but anyway, you would have us picking and choosing our own teams. And I think we have elected the chairman, whoever that may be, and it's his position, his decision of where he thinks we should do best. And if that doesn't work, he has the option to move it. But I don't think it needs board approval for the chairman to appoint committees.
Was there a particular reason why that change was made here in the bylaws? Did that follow another?
Doesn't the council chairman choose the committees or appoint committees and the chairmen of those committees? Is that in with
According to the bylaws, but not according to the rules.
for the county council?
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said.
I was saying, I think the chairman of county council, and I guess that's in their rules, that chairman appoints the committees and the chairs. And council does not approve that, so I don't know if that's written into there as well as ours, in there. But what we got from Nanette, isn't that the restated rules, second amended and restated rules?
That's
Is that
right.
what we're talking about
Yeah.
here? Okay. Can that just be included when we send the bylaws, so if they choose to look at it, they can and compare it?
I think our whole intention was to get the bylaws like everybody liked them,
Yeah,
and to be sure if there's a conflict
straighten
in
it
some
out.
other document, we'd
Yeah.
be smart enough to change that.
Right.
To reflect what everybody's agreed to in
Right.
these bylaws.
Okay, because they should match.
Sure they should, and I think
Okay.
they will once
Okay.
we get to the
There.
point that the bylaws are where everybody likes them.
Okay.
The chairman should be able to appoint his committee members as he sees fit.
Is that a motion?
Say again?
Is that a motion?
Yes, sir, if it needs to be.
That's not the question, that's not the purpose, it was not part of the agenda. The agenda was to go over these, bylaws.
And to make changes as necessary.
But if they're
well, you
different,
can make the agenda whatever you want it to be, Lance, but I'm just saying that, you can, the rule, we got two sets of papers that we're supposed to go by. One's called bylaws, one's called rules.
Right, and we're trying to
And I'm just
consolidate.
saying you ought to put them together and ask county council's blessing on both of them at the same time. If you don't, you're liable to run into a problem that's really not related so much to the fact of something as it is somebody saying, well, why you got two sets of rules? One you call rules and one you call bylaws. Why not just put them all together?
All right, why
Well,
don't we?
I think Ms. Britton explained that the rules may change from time to time that are more fluid than the bylaws would be. We may change the rules from time to time and not want to go back through the whole process of changing the bylaws.
You may have explained it to your satisfaction, not to mine, but, if, again, I didn't expect it.
There's a motion on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
All right, do we want to vote on this today or bring it up at the board meeting? To
Well, we
make
Yeah.
got to have when we leave the board meeting on the 18th,
18.
then we're going to have
That's
to,
when we approve the draft.
the final draft. But if that's going to be part of the draft, we need to have it in.
You have to make the changes to have it, to approve it at that time.
Be a recommendation to have that.
Right, I'm,
Draft.
right. All right.
Nothing's final till October the 7th. If we get
Yeah, I think we can just make that as a recommendation for the draft, for the board, when the board will vote on it.
What is the
To remove that.
recommendation?
To remove the subject to approval of the board statement on the makes committee assignments.
So it doesn't have
Make it
anything to
more-
do about including the rules with the bylaws?
No, sir. It
Okay.
would be taking that out so it would be consistent with the rules.
You mean consistent with the bylaws?
Well, we're taking it out of the bylaws,
They can be consistent with each other.
yeah. We're talking about
And that
taking the
is that
subject to approval,
The chairman and the chairman alone makes committee appointments.
correct.
All right, next slide.
Wait a minute, I thought we were gonna vote on something.
We're gonna have that as a recommendation to the board.
Not forthcoming.
I think
from me.
we need to go ahead and vote to make it a recommendation to go to the board. We need to vote to recommend the change, so it's an
So
official
we've got a
recommendation.
motion to recommend the change, removing subject to approval to the board.
I make that recommendation.
We've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Thank you.
The language in red was part of the description of the chair's duties. Again, these duties were rewritten, so the red part would be deleted. And then the blue was added, that the chair and in the blue, or the executive director shall execute all contracts. It recognizes that there are times it's appropriate, once something's approved, for the executive director to go ahead and execute contractual documents. So that was added. Any discussion on those items? All right, next slide. Again, we are under Article 8, officers, and this is Section C, and it relates to the duties of the secretary. And we have some deletions in that section.
I'd like to ask a question.
All right, we have like removal of the nominating procedure responsibility and executing contracts. Mr. Gray?
Why do we remove the secretary's responsibility for seeing that the election is conducted properly. Remove his duties about, that relate to election. Who makes that recommendation? I think it's a good idea.
And exactly what is
I
that
think as far as
responsibility?
the members of the board, that was being done by council. I mean, they have the appointing authority on that.
That's what I was wondering, why we, as secretary or anyone here would have
Secretary's never
done
done
that.
Right.
We've never
that's
done that.
Council's responsibility, and I don't
Right.
think really it was being done at this.
It was not.
Right.
Okay.
So I think it was obsolete.
I didn't understand that when I read it, actually.
It was in the original, and it really was not being used or followed because that was really council's.
Pam, I agree with you. There's language somewhere, I didn't mark it, that says that only according to the bylaws, only the chair and vice chair shall be elected. And it either states or implies that the secretary and treasurer may be appointed. I agree with you that should they be appointed instead of elected, but this relates to the election of all officers, doesn't it?
Right, and I believe that the practice was actually, there was the appointment of a
This also dealt with,
nominating committee.
that also dealt with the election of members to the board.
Right, which was with the council. And then the
Officers with the nominating
officers was
committee.
done by the ad hoc nominating committee. So that language was really kind of obsolete or not being followed.
Okay, I buy that.
That's, and then on
You don't have to do
signing,
anything.
you know, sometimes like with a private corporation, a corporate secretary is required to sign certain documents with the bank or other kinds of contracts. Really with the authority, that is not a requirement that y'all face. So it's more of a private corporate type requirement. So it was obsolete also. I mean, it doesn't harm anything if you want it in there, but it's
No reason to have it.
no reason to have it. Unless y'all want it. So
Leave
that's
it
why
out if we
was-
don't need it.
Okay. All right, next slide. This is another
What
one.
does the secretary do? Do you know?
This-
I can tell you what I did. Nothing.
Well,
Except every now and then they'd say, you need to sign this. I'd go ahead and sign it.
and there are, I mean, if, you know, again, with the electronics and the video, the archiving or the recording of the meetings, the minutes being taken in-house, it is more of a formality. Should you ever get to a position of issuing bonds or something, there would be possibly a role for the secretary to execute some bond documents and all, but that's about it for,
And I think in keeping back in the day where the secretary and the treasurer really had that responsibility, and some of the documents even says they did not have to be a member of the board. They could be an outside hired bookkeeper
right,
or
sometimes they'll
something
call it a
like that.
recording secretary to the
Yeah.
board, right?
So,
I don't think, since the staff handle all of that, I don't think one of us would want to take minutes and come in and do all of that. And as the treasurer, I don't think they're gonna let another human being handle the money other than the man up at the county.
Right.
I'm assuming.
And that's one
They
reason.
really
we're-
don't let people do that.
And that's why we're getting to subpart D now too, about the treasurer. I mean, plus, what board member would want to present financial reports when they're not the ones taking in the money and keeping the records? So that was another kind of older provision, more of a corporate setting perhaps. And nowadays, you don't really see that done. And so we deleted the part about the financial report. Overseeing the books of account, you have, the auditor to do that, so we did remove that.
It's just a personal opinion. I think it's just there because it was there. Why did your mama bake the turkey so-and-so? Well, it's
the whole
just there, and we're just eliminating now any duties and any responsibilities. It's really kind of a popularity contest to kind of say, well, then the next vice chair will be so-and-so, and the next chairman will be so-and-so. Put you in line to move up the ladder.
All right, any problems with the changes in subpart D? All right, next slide. We made sure you had the right code section for your indemnification. Again, that was a change with the development of a nonprofit code. So we've inserted the code section applicable to nonprofits. Next slide. No changes. Next slide. No changes. Next slide. Dissolution. We do have a change here on recommendation in connection with our filing with the Internal Revenue Service. We needed to state more clearly how the assets of the authority would be distributed in the event of dissolution. As I recall, we had several versions of provisions, and we decided, or it was decided, that this would maybe be the best approach. The assets would go to Horry County. The board has input. It says in such a manner as determined by the board of directors of the authority, however, upon approval by county council. So really, you would determine what you think is in the best interest of the county for the handling of the assets. Accordingly, certain of the, quote, assets cannot be, well, would be in the form of a landfill and a recycling facility. So you would make recommendations pertaining to those items and matters. The council would have final say-so, so to speak, in what happens to that, but you would at least have your input. Again, it has a prohibition of any, and again, this is something that, as I recall, we also needed to put in the filing so that the IRS would know that you're aware of this, that none of the net earnings would go to the personal benefit of any board member, officer, trustee, employee, agent, or anyone else connected with the authority.
I know it's not redlined, but can we go back up to the first paragraph in the first sentence? And I'm reading that to mean that 5 members of this board could dissolve the authority
Right.
without county council? Had that always been that way? And I thought that we discussed.
This is the way it's always been.
It has? I thought we had discussed that county council would be involved in that.
I thought we had too.
I think what we just,
discussed, excuse me,
go ahead.
I thought what we discussed was what was gonna happen to the money. We discussed that at length, and
Yeah, I remembered that.
however
I
you
just,
put it, we're not gonna have any control over it when it's gone, but it's always been, we could dissolve this.
it has.
All right, and I thought there might have been a discussion of whether county council could dissolve without that.
But that goes on, if we dissolve it, and the solid waste authority dissolves it, the county council has to approve it though. Is that
Not-
not correct? No? No.
Not the way it's written. The money's gonna go to them if it's dissolved, but they wouldn't.
Right.
No, basically, all we would say, we quit, it's your game.
Right.
That's right.
You get everything, we're through.
But
I
the
agree
county
with you.
council, it has to approve the dissolution and how we gonna handle the money.
Not according to that. They
Not
just have
according to that. We could dissolve, but they would get to distribute the money.
All that.
Yeah, they still gonna decide what to do with everything that's here.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can make a law says 5 of us can't quit, or, you can't dissolve this. I mean, surely we can. But it doesn't change anything except they're gonna put 5 more in our place and keep on going.
Right, in effect, your recommendation on distribution of assets is advisory.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not necessarily so concerned about us being able to dissolve it, as I am about what you took out in red. I don't think it's a responsible thing not to leave that in there as our intent, as this authority, that our debts and expenses be paid and its assets legally distributed in conformity with our bylaws for the purposes set forth. I would like, as a board member, if I'm going to sit here and be responsible for collecting monies for a purpose and collecting monies to save and promising to have the money here and being on a financial committee to collect these and actually say, and everyone assume, that we as members of this board are going to make sure that our debts are paid, our expenses are paid, our employees are protected, and our assets done. I don't have any problem whatsoever after that is done for the money to go to Horry County Council and let them choose what they want to do with that. But I would like my intent as a board member so that whichever county council may be there, if this should ever happen, would know that that is what we intended to do and that we collected monies with purpose to pay for closure and post-closure as we had that money, so that the citizens of this county didn't wake up 10 years later and that money be gone and their taxes be raised for that. And as a board member, I would like for any council today, 10 years from today or 100 years today, know my intent on what should be done correctly and ethically with this money.
Is that a very long motion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want that put back in, and to add that we keep that money for closure and close closure.
Okay, then you got a second.
Can we go
So
back to this first?
Yeah, we have a motion and a second. Now we can discuss.
Well, we just breezed by the first paragraph. I agree with you entirely, Mr. Thompson. If there's any one thing that's gonna raise the ire of county council, is the fact that any 5 of us, or all 7 of us, can say, we're hereby dissolved. The rest of it is I agree with your concerns, Ms. Creech, but I'm just saying we need to deal with that. That, to me, that needs to be
Right.
struck
Let's
altogether.
talk about the motion, and then let's go back to that one, since we got a motion on the floor. And Ms. Creech, the way I understand it, if what was removed about the debts and expenses being paid and then the assets being legally distributed, and could we just pick up in the blue where it be distributed to Horry County instead of in conformity with these bylaws, we would change that?
That would be
That would be-
fine with me, but I'd like to have the red back in, and yes, at that point. But we have people that have insurance that will be paid. We have people here that we have promised their retirement. We have a lot of commitments that we have that if this money was removed, it would not be there to carry out those commitments. And I don't really know what recourse the personnel would have if this was dissolved. And none of that was put in there that was made to be. And even if they did, the cost to them personally would be more than it should be. And with everything that we pay and what we owe and what we're doing, I cannot imagine us stopping at some point and not have bills that come in that need to be paid. And I also would like to add that the monies for closure and post-closure, the monies that we collect and we put us on a fee, and we tell people, by word of mouth and by what we do at this board meeting, that the closure and post-closure monies will be protected and will not be distributed for any other purpose.
Listen, everything that we do here, we're a component unit of county government. And we act as if we are solely and responsibly and authoritatively, anything that we do is by and of and for the liability of the county of Horry. I understand where you're coming from, Pam. I'm just saying that we're, until you deal with the first one, why worry about the second one? I mean, I don't feel disinclined to vote against what you're saying is that we need to make sure that the money that's been set aside, some tens of millions, whatever it is, that it go where it's supposed to go. But that's the obligation of Horry County government, and if they dissolve us or don't dissolve us, they're still responsible for it.
I understand, Mr. Gray, and I agree with you, they are. But this is the only arm of the county that I know that doesn't owe any money. Our county owes close to $500 million. We do not. That is one thing that I will say I have admired about the Solid Waste Authority as a part of government for quite some time.
We don't own it.
I know we
Horry
don't.
County government does.
They do. But I would, as a board member, and was appointed here to handle what is being said in here that is to set policy, that my intent on policy for the money that I feel responsible for, it be done correctly, and then if the county ever does that and they choose to take that back over, they can, thank you, they can do that. I just want my intent known as a board member what I would like for them to do. If they change that, they got my blessing, but they'll have to do it.
You have my,
So we've got a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion?
what is the
What-
motion?
It would be to add back the first part of the deleted red section, and after all its debts and expenses have been paid, all its assets may be legally so distributed, and then pick up right below distributed to Horry County and leave the rest of the blue in.
Let me ask a question. Our employees and as Ms. Creek said, would be taking, when we say our debts, we would take care, like retirement and such as that would be taken care of with this statement. Is
I
that?
think there's a difference between debts and expenses and future obligations. I'm not sure.
The future obligations, I have a question about, and we may need to go back to Frank Curitan on this, because one question I have is if the authority is in a position at, say, sometime in the future, there's some new development in, waste disposal that will require a bond issue, then if you're saying you're going to pay off all debts and expenses, you may create a bonding problem where you called bonds or something that might, so we might need some assistance in a drafting language that would take care of the concerns about currently due and payable debts and long-term obligations being honored, or maybe something to that effect. But I would not know how to do it to protect any bonding capability and
Right.
needs that may arise in the future. We could certainly ask, I think Frank had actually kind of worked on this language, but you don't have any bonds currently. But the way, things are so expensive, you may come up with a new technology where that would be the most viable way to fund it. And I'd like to maybe have Danny and I talk with him and make sure we have the right language to address concerns about making sure everybody's paid in terms of payroll and other.
One other thing too, closure and post-closure funds, that we need to be sure that those are protected.
And I've written that one down.
Yeah,
Rebecca?
because we as Ms. Creek said, we've got the post-closure and closure funds already. And,
Yeah.
I got that.
I agree with you, I'm 100%, I'm gonna vote yes, but I'm gonna tell you that if we are dissolved and folded into county government, which we already are, they get to do whatever they want to with it, and besides, the taxing authority of Horry County government is where we meet, that DEC requirement, the statement of economic interest or whatever. But I'm gonna vote with you, cause you got all the white hats, and I'm just saying that what you're saying. I could see how, once you start tying up funds that might be needed for other purposes, and the elected officials start getting in trouble.
Reverend Copeland?
I was just gonna say that we need to move forward. I will do the motion where we incorporate we get the appropriate language to incorporate in here.
Can we have Ms. Creech amend her motion?
That's what I was
to-
gonna substitute that, or either add
yeah,
amendment to her
note
motion.
the concerns about the language and have the legal verbiage worked on and brought
Yes,
back to our
I will amend my motion to allow that. Thank you.
motion. And a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. So we've noted that, and we'll hopefully have something at the board meeting we can better understand and vote on. Now, let's go back to the first paragraph, and maybe I misunderstood that. I was just under the impression, I think if I were on council, I would want something, a little more protection that, and I think there's a difference between just 5 or 7 people quitting and 5 or 7 people deciding we're going to dissolve the authority. Because I think if 5 of us quit, Mr. Jones, you're correct, they're going to replace us anyway. But if, I'm not sure that we couldn't cause some problems if we dissolve the authority for the council to, I don't know what the
Well, I don't think you'd
action would
want-
be to reinstate.
Right, I don't think you'd want to surprise them with
Right.
something like that, and I wouldn't recommend it. I believe they approved this verbiage initially,
They did.
Then,
so that, you
They're
know, in a
aware that
way,
that's there.
They have approved it at one time. Now, the current body may not be aware it's written that way. If they haven't looked at it since, you know, while they've held office, and that may be a surprise to them, and,
It won't be.
No.
okay.
In my opinion, if we don't change it saying that that goes to them, they will do so anyway, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think,
okay, good.
yeah.
Moving forward.
This open 69, 90 wide open. But if you wanna leave it in, go for it.
All right, that's everything on the bylaws. Click on through there.
Can we take a 5-minute break before we move
Yes.
into the?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Do
Yep,
we have
let's
some
do that.
other business?
We were going to go through the rules.
We're going through the rules.
Oh, that was on the agenda.
Well, Ms. Britton mentioned that we were going to go through that as well while we were here. Yeah.
Right. I think you had asked for a copy, Mr. Gray, and I believe
Did.
you mentioned about there being an integral
But I
part.
asked for a specific purpose, and that was because the chair was delegated with the responsibility of enforcing the rules, and I wanted to know, well, what are the rules? But I didn't say we ought to have a meeting about it, but if y'all want to sit here and talk about it, well, it's fine with me. I
right.
wasn't prepared.
Well, we do not have to take them up today. I just thought you felt like,
Well,
No.
if we're gonna submit them to county council at the same time, we need to go ahead and go over them.
Well, it's not on the agenda. Whoever, you got this set of rules, it's yesterday or today. I really wasn't prepared to talk
well,
about it.
from my perspective, I thought there were certain rules that were germane to the review of the bylaws that needed to be discussed in conjunction with the bylaw amendments. And if you wanted to bring those up in terms of how they're affected by or related to the bylaws, we could
I
talk about
stated-
that, but if you want to do that separately, we could certainly,
I
the
stated what I
bylaws
think
off
they should
until
do,
later.
and that is just attach them and say, this is part of the deal. I mean,
I don't think we need to attach them without reviewing them.
I think we should discuss it.
Well, if you want to change the agenda, just make a motion to change the agenda.
And it can be a change. Do we need to do that?
Well, I think Ms. Britton explained it was kind of part and parcel to the bylaws. It was all kind of one discussion. So I think if we go through it, Mr. Gray, if you,
All right, whatever you say.
yeah, and then, you know, we're not going to vote on anything anyway until the board meeting.
I would suggest any rules affected by bylaw amendments are germane to those. Let's discuss those. Any other issues that might need to be changed about the rules, let's just, when there's a,
Need a motion to change the agenda or not? Because it's all one.
No, I think it's part of the bylaws discussion, so.
Just changed and said we don't have to do that.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come to order. Discussion. So, Ms. Britton, if we can kind of talk about what is specific to the bylaws.
I think what we ought to do is look at the provisions that may be inconsistent, and I realize we've had them, but I'm not sure everybody has looked at them in that kind of detail. Mr. Gray, you mentioned a couple of areas. You want to let's start with yours?
I already made my proposal about what to do with these.
All right.
Have any further words to say?
All right. Then why don't we look at the first page real quick?
Please.
We'll update the FOIA reference. All right, let's go to the
I just see it looks like up on should be upon under rules.
upon. That's
1-1,
right.
yeah.
Should be. All right, next slide. And next slide. All right. Next slide.
Under 2-4.1, I had a question. The chairman may call a briefing meeting, workshop, or committee meeting during any regular board meeting. Would that relate to the situation we had with the?
It would be.
Okay.
That was done under the rules, but really, that all called meetings should be done in accordance with FOIA.
Okay.
So we need to highlight that.
Right.
And replace that,
Okay.
that language.
Okay.
All right.
Gonna replace what language?
2-4.1, we need to make that consistent with FOIA.
What does that mean?
Well, this says that you may call these types of meetings during the board meeting or at any time upon 2 business days' notice. We need to make sure under the Freedom of Information Act that the agenda's posted on the bulletin boards and that
Notices are properly sent.
the notices are sent out and that depending on the kind of meeting, the proper notice is given.
I mean, like if somebody files a FOIA request, the chairman calls for a separate meeting?
It's like if the chairman said, well, let's just meet 2 days from now to take up this particular matter.
Okay.
And that's not a regular meeting of the board, so it hasn't been posted on the bulletin board. Well, there are posting requirements under section 30-4-80 that are supposed to be met for each meeting.
Looks like today, we can call a meeting today, for a meeting today.
You would still,
Or 2 days.
well, you have to have the notice posted as a special called meeting. And the notice for a called meeting must be posted as early as possible, but not less than 24 hours before the meeting, and it must include the agenda, date, time, and place of the meeting. We'd have to notify the press. We'd have to take all those safeguards, and we need to make sure that is apparent in the
So,
rules.
in terms of 2 point, whatever it is, it's just to make things more transparent. You're gonna give more
That's right.
notice to members and members of the public.
And make sure everything's posted and the prep, all the details that have to be followed, because sometimes if that's not written in, someone may think, well, I can just call a meeting and not go through the other steps.
What
And
about when you just decide to add something to an agenda? You want to
you can
change
amend the
amend it.
agenda. You can amend the agenda at the meeting.
This a call meeting?
That is not a call meeting.
Today's not a call meeting.
Well,
Today was.
Today is a special, but right, but it was a, yes, a call meeting, but it was advertised or posted. It was, and we have an agenda for it. We're addressing the bylaws, we're addressing rules that
Pertain to the bylaws.
pertain to the bylaws that are going to be submitted to council with the bylaws.
Good stretch.
All right, you know, I would suggest if Mr. Gray wants a motion amending the agenda to include the rules as part of the submission with the bylaws, we entertain it and do it.
Do we have a motion to amend the agenda, excuse me? Have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Does that mean that you can change an agenda anytime?
There is a recent decision that came out that said that at a properly called and noticed meeting, the board may revise its agenda and amend it because the purpose, it's done in public, the meeting has been noticed to the public, it reversed a prior decision that it held otherwise.
So we, when, subject to approval of the majority vote.
That the agenda
We
may
don't
be
even need
amended.
to publish an agenda. You just say, well, we're having a meeting.
That you still have to publish the agenda for the meeting, but you may amend that agenda in the meeting.
Well, that's what the Press Association argued, but they lost.
That's right. That is what the Press Association argued, that you could not. And the case that just came out rejected that argument for properly called and publicized meetings.
Okay.
All right.
What constitutes two dash 3.1?
An emergency meeting.
Yeah,
Um,
and what are requirements involved with that?
Okay, the emergency meeting does not, you know, the code does not define emergency. However, with the emergency meeting, you don't have to, it kind of says it right, you don't have to advertise. What it says is if you have a call meeting, you have to have at least 24 hours notice. You have to give the agenda, date, time, and place of the meeting. This requirement does not apply to emergency meetings of public bodies. Let's say that a hurricane is coming and it's imminent and it's worse than you anticipated. County government, the authority had to call a meeting because of issues with the storm debris site, and you don't have a lot of time. You could call an emergency meeting to discuss measures that need to be taken in terms of hurricane preparedness if it's something that came up all of a sudden. Let's say you have a flooding issue and you need to discuss making available emergency resources. That would be an emergency. You could go ahead and put things into motion to call the meeting. I'd recommend you go ahead and put it out there, you know, for whatever public notice you could give so the public would know. But that is the type of emergency, something dire, something where notice is not practical.
Makes sense.
All right. Next slide. Anything there? All right, next slide. Talking about advertising public hearings on, it's page 3 of the rules. The forum, limiting public speakers to 5 minutes. really, public hearings being limited to 30 minutes. These have been in effect, and really, there hasn't been a need to change these, has there, Danny? Executive sessions, and the next slide. Again, this really just goes with the code. Again, it stresses no vote shall be taken in executive session. There are AG opinions that say you cannot even take a straw vote in executive session. There was actually one situation, it was kind of comical in a way, where I guess it was a chair or some particular strong board member told the executive session it would not be let go until everybody agreed with that person's position on the matter.
Lock the bathroom.
And the AG said that was a violation of FOIA because he was trying to vote agreement in executive session that would take place when they came out. So that was pretty funny. All right, next slide. Agenda. Based on a new ruling, we do need to bring that up. It says, it does say no non-agenda items may be added for emergency. That's because you don't really even have notice of emergency, and that really could be a way to discuss things without the public knowing. All right, next.
Non-agenda item discussed. Your ruling has changed on adding non-agenda items. You have to vote.
This says non-agenda items may be discussed at any regular meeting upon motion of any member of the board and approved by majority. That needs to be changed upon motion to amend the agenda. Is the proper motion for that. Okay. Next, order of business. Anything there? Next slide. This is more on public input. Okay, next slide. All right, next slide. Next slide.
There's just a typo on my, or
Where
a
is that?
spacing, you know, that I just identified. It didn't look like it's really showed up there, maybe, but,
Is that on page?
page 5, H, just a typing.
Okay, next slide. All right, next slide.
Five just kind of
Yeah,
reiterates
yeah.
what we talked about in our bylaws.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that is consistent with the bylaws.
Should be.
Okay.
5-6 is using that same purpose.
Yeah, we need to say, we can take that out and just say, shall speak or act on behalf of. Probably be more-
It would be one statement, right?
We'll recommend that.
Okay.
All right. All right, next slide. All right. They're talking about the roll call vote,
What does 5-8 mean?
5-8. It can be called down by the chair. It says removal as permitted by the bylaws, but I do not believe we have is there a removal? I don't recall a removal procedure in the bylaws. Well, removal from the board. I'm read it from the meeting. Okay. All right, removal from the board.
So you would add language, removal from the board?
Because you could read it, removal
That's
from
the
the
way I was
meeting.
reading it. That's the way I was reading
From
it.
the board.
From the meeting is the
I
way
was
I was
reading it
reading
from
it,
the
so
meeting, it
I
being-
do think it needs to be clarified.
Which one is it?
From the board.
From the board? Yes, okay.
All right, we'll note that. Because you could read it either way, but
And
I
what-
was thinking from
I
the
agree.
meeting.
And what is that legal phrase? In every other similar instance, I mean, there may be other instances like that throughout,
Sure.
where what is intended based here is a removal from the board, not removal from the meeting. That would put whoever the chair is in a very awkward position, as well as the person being removed.
All right, roll call vote, 6-2. There was an interesting FOIA AG opinion where the board chair insisted that everybody vote in code. He assigned a number. They had to go 1, 2, 3, or 4, and the court ruled, or the AG ruled, no code voting. So, next slide. Let's see. Again, there's an ethics provision. We probably ought to update the supplement on that citation, or use a generic citation where it wouldn't require.
What page in terms?
That is page 6, under Article 6, voting. This gives you the steps that you should go to if you find that, for example, a business you have an ownership interest in, or your spouse works for, or family member defined in the code. It tells you how you go about recusing yourself and declaring that you're not being involved. So that's the procedure for avoiding ethics,
Are you talking about dealing with conflicts of interest?
conflicts of interest, yes, sir.
That's covered by state law.
That's covered by state law, and what this does is, it is, and this just lets the board members know you need a written statement. You need to give it to the board chair or state law or secretary, and
In other words, there's no enforcement procedures in here, or police power
this is
procedures.
more of a, right, this is more of a
Form of difference,
written in layman's language as opposed to the code language.
as opposed to what?
It's written a little simpler than the code, like in everyday
But I
language.
mean, the intent is to inform members
It's informational. It's
Of
more
what-
procedural. Here's what,
what conflicts, what constitutes a conflict of interest, and
and this
how
is
you
what you
should
do when you
proceed or
have,
not proceed, but it doesn't empower the board with any-
that's
to do
code.
anything.
Right, that's statutory. You're right. This
Thank you.
just says, this is, it goes to state ethics. And that, this is,
Right, a
if you
complaint
have
must
one,
be-
this is what you do about it. This is how you,
A complaint is filed with the state ethics commission.
Yes.
It's just like our lobbyist got a complaint filed against Al Allen for something, I don't know, stealing gas or something like that. But you have to file a complaint.
right, this is just for the purpose of telling the board members what they need to do if they have a conflict. It's informational and procedural. But it doesn't replace the code. And it
You got
doesn't
a-
assume the
A
jurisdiction.
lawyer, with a third, somebody has to file a complaint with the state states what conflicts of interest are, and they have investigatory power, and
Yes,
they
and a hearing.
investigate, and they make decision amongst themselves about whether or not a violation occurred. The one that I mentioned, they found that no violation occurred, but in any case, it's not something that the board does.
Right, this does not involve the board in the State Ethics Commission's business.
Mr. Gray, I believe our lobbyist denied the fact that he had anything to do with Mr. Allen, as you just stated, about ethics report or something like that.
Yes, I'm aware of what he said.
But you said that he did it, didn't you?
It came across as if you said that our lobbyist, and I was wondering about that too, because
Well, then I wouldn't worry about what I said if you know it not to be true.
Well, it's on the record.
yeah, but it's on, you put it on record. I mean, you said it to get it on record.
It's in a public venue, it's on record, you're saying that, which could be liable.
Well, I guess, I'm just passing on what I heard. I'll just say rumor. How about if I just say rumor has it? Whatever you want it to be, Mike, is fine with me.
All
All
right,
right,
let's
moving
move
right
forward.
along. Let's see, next slide. All right, this is more on the ethics. Next slide.
And this is just where our committees, it kind of is consistent with what the bylaws, about the chairman assigning committees, and
Right. Does
so we
anybody-
should be good there.
All right, parliamentary procedure. Again, this is a summary of some of the
Next.
more often needed
Next slide.
motions.
Next slide.
All right, next slide.
There we go.
Right. All right, next slide includes more rules about not interrupting.
Can we back up a little bit?
All right, prior slide.
Let's look at some of the rules on this so we can make sure that we are familiar with them. 8.2, 8.3, 8.4. Motions aren't debatable until it's been restated by the chairman. Motions to reconsider.
All right, motions to interrupt a speak, well, that may interrupt a speaker. All right, next slide. Oh, wait, no. Yes, well, wait a minute. Yes, next. That's right. All right, next slide. Next slide. Again, I think this is really geared toward going through the chain of command on documents. and observing the confidential nature of personnel files. Next slide. Any other comments or questions?
I have one, that we operated under, these, rules back to 1999, and then in October of 2011, so 11, 12 years later, we decided that we needed to update them or review them or whatever. Do you know the reason that we, found it necessary after some 10+ years that we needed to, update our rules?
Mr. Ray, I was just informed that it had been a while since they'd looked at, and that there was a feeling that we needed to just update them to make them more consistent with
State code and,
code and
yeah, that was the way
practice.
I recalled it when we did it back in 2011, was just to review and make sure that we were currently operating under a good set of rules that, you know, we were comfortable with. There was nothing outdated or
Right,
obsolete in it.
remove any obsolete references and,
Good reason. This is the second amended and restated. That implies that there's a first and there was a first set of rules and then a second set of rules. Anyway, more than one. Danny, do we have the rules that existed prior to this?
I'm sure we do, someplace.
Would you look and see if we do, please? I'd like to see, there must have been something compellingly different about, what had transpired that we needed to, do what we did in October of 2011. And I would think that looking at the previous rules, there must have been something not real good about them or something compelling reason.
Well, it's for sure going over these rules today, we didn't do as much redlining on these as we did on the ones that were 20-some years old.
And you know that you remember that, so you remember.
I remember we ain't made many changes today, and I really don't remember what was changed the last time. I really don't.
If you could find that, I would appreciate it. And I certainly don't mind you sending it to everybody.
You only do.
all right.
The next question was whether, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know whether I'm allowed to speak or not speak, was whether or not we were going to include this as part of what we were going to ask county council to approve.
And my understanding was we were going to go through the timeline of the bylaws that were stated back at the board meeting, and that we would include a copy of the rules as a fluid document that could be changed within, you know, the next 3 years, like it was since 2011, or the next 2 weeks, if, in fact, you said you haven't had a chance to review them as closely as you'd like to. If you would bring something back, we could easily change those rules where it's a lot more difficult to change our bylaws. My understanding is that we'd like to get the bylaws established and accepted and have these rules as a fluid document that the chairman would enforce the current standing rules that it may change from time to time.
It didn't change for 12 years or 11, whatever it is. I'm not sure that you answered my question. Are we going to submit this to county council as part of what we're asking approval for?
We're going to submit it to them, but we're submitting the bylaws to be approved because it references the rules in the bylaws. But again, those could be changed without going back through this entire process to change the bylaws. So
Bylaws would be a reference document. It's
Right.
an appendix.
The bylaws can only be changed, the rules can only be changed by a member, by the same procedure as the bylaws. I mean, I can't just come up here and say.
The rules aren't required to be approved by county council. are they?
Right, yeah, that would be just as referenced in the bylaws, but not, we wouldn't go through the same steps to amend the rules like we would the bylaws.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that we are going to submit these, and
As a
that we're going
reference
to say,
document.
we have these rules today. They may change from time to time.
Could change tomorrow, or next year, or in 11 years.
And they are consistent with the bylaws. In other words, you can't say, well, we're not going to go by the bylaws, we're going to go by the rules.
Correct. We wouldn't be able to disregard our own bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
So everybody has the schedule of the timeline, when these will happen and what will happen with the bylaws and all. And then if, at the board meeting, we'll vote on changes that were recommended today in reference to the bylaws. And we'll update the rules as necessary as well. And then we will have the question about needing some further guidance on changing the legal guidance on changing the wordage about dissolution and so forth. Any other questions or comments about the workshop today? Well, I want to thank everybody for the hard work and attention, and we are going to get out before 5 o'clock, which is good. So I think we made a lot of progress, and thank you all for your time and being here. If there's no further business, we'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.